So let's say Arta was a Romaniot community in Epirus. Corfu originally was Byzantine and then Venetian. Crete was Venetian and then Ottoman. So basically what you have is a mixture. There's no pure culture. At the time of the Spanish expulsion, you had Apulian Jews and Sicilian Jews expelled from those regions and arrived in Corfu. Apulians and Sicilians also migrated to Arta, but they abandoned that Italian Jewish culture much earlier and they became Romaniot. In Corfu, you always had, until the Holocaust, a Greek Romaniot community, congregation, synagogue, and customs, and an Apulian Italian, Judeo-Italian culture and synagogue life. In Crete, you had, originally it was Byzantine, and then it became Venetian, and then about 1666 it became Ottoman, and 1912 Greek. By the time it became Greek, that connection to Greece is totally foreign. What you had already in the 1700s, for example, you had Jews that migrated from Asia Minor, Sfaradim, that left all sorts of disasters and migrated to Crete, to Heraklion and Chania. So there they brought with them a Sephardic culture, but they integrated into the Venetian culture, which also had Romaniot roots. All this was because of former Greek influences on the island, not because the Jews who lived in the 17 and 1800s with Greeks, they didn't adopt their cultural mores. Their Romaniot origins were much earlier. Now, I'll give you just some brief examples. So, for example, in Yanina, they had a reception room in their home, the Jews, called Camera di Riceveri. It comes from the Italian. Or they had their marzipan, their marzipan wasn't even from the Italian word, it was called marzipane, but in Judeo-Greek it was called marzipazes. Okay? So Italian words entered the vocabulary, like carrozza for a carriage, or levanta for perfume, or cassata, a cheese patty. Whereas that cassata, for example, in Greek is tiropita. Okay, but there's a different influence. So it became part of how Judeo-Greek speaking Jews spoke in Yanina, and then, of course, in the area in Arta. Now, for example, in Heraklion, you had a synagogue, let's say, in 1391. Those were Jews who were expelled from Spain already then. And then they established a synagogue, and it was called Alemannico, okay? And it was also called the synagogue of Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay, they had other synagogues. One was called Shvilitiko, and another in Istrombuliatiko. In other words, from Istrubal, which is a pine cone, but it has a Spanish twist to it, and finally a Greek diminutive form. It just shows you how the cultures are interwoven. Okay, so for these Romaniot Jews, or Sephardic Jews who became Romaniot Jews under a Venetian culture, in Crete, they underwent many changes. Okay, they underwent many changes in language. So if you were in Venetian-held territory in the Ionian Islands, let's say in Corfu, or under Venice in Cyprus or Crete, you spoke Judeo-Italian but a Venetian dialect, even though the same Jews came from the southern regions in Italia like Apulia and Sicily. So in Epirus, as I mentioned before, you had some customs, like you had a special Purim from Saragossa, not Saragossa, Spain, Saragossa or Syracuse or Syracusa, which means Saragossa in Epirus, in Ioannina or Arta. Okay, so it's not just there was a Greek and a Jewish Greek identity, which you have poems, but there's a whole mélange, and so you really have to think of the cultures as being a mixture of all these various cultures. Just one more thing. Okay, in Corfu, for example, again, it was Venetian. They spoke an Apulian dialect, Apulian Judeo. They were Apulian, but they spoke a Venetian dialect of Judeo-Italian. Okay. Plus, they also were interwoven with the Romanio community. But for example, they had a massacre in 1729. And so they had a special fast day before Purim commemorating that, and the hymns for that were written actually in Greek. So all this is compounded in a melange which you don't have in other places. So that particular Corfiot custom didn't occur in Ioannina. And of course it didn't occur even in a different Venetian dominion in Crete, even though, let's say, there were families that migrated from the Ionian Islands to Crete. They weren't dominant in Crete, so that custom that they had from Corfu wouldn't have been a custom in Crete.